Welcome to part 4 of Tokyo Jazz Joint's 5 days in June.
Okay, my raincoat totally rocks, and you were so jealous because it was that hardcore rainy season Japan where
And windy.
like you would be drenched within a second of being outside. So all your mockery was really just you were thinking to yourself, damn, I should have packed a raincoat, you know?
Well, I mean, if it helps you to tell yourself that's fine. But anyway, people can make their own judgment once I post this video of you putting your raincoat on and checking your hood in the mirror at the bus station. But when we got to the bus station in Kagoshima, then my friend, a guy called David, who has now moved permanently out there to Japan, he's married to a lovely Japanese lady, and he's living and teaching down there. I actually met him in Dublin. He was on a course that I was delivering. We kept in touch, and he very kindly offered to let us stay for the night and take us around some of the hot spots of the city that he lived in. But actually, in terms of the Jazz Joint project, James, it was only one in the end. I think we had a couple that we were sort of sussing out, but in the end, it was only one that we managed to get to, or certainly one that was open and seemed to work in terms of the project.
It was difficult because, like I said, well, the rain passed eventually, but, by the time we dropped off our bags, went to have a bite to eat, which is, again, another one to look out for on our social media feeds, because we had a very interesting experience in a Kagoshima local ramen shop. But we ended up going to a place that I had been to years earlier. I had gone down to Kagoshima maybe 3 years before our trip. And I found this bar, and it was totally by chance. It was called RIFF. And what was interesting, it's the only place, and our regular listeners will know that I've been going around to jazz joints for 15 years. I've been to over 175 of them. I've never been into a place that advertised itself as a rock and jazz bar. Oh, so as soon as I saw the sign, I was like, okay, I'm going to spend some time in here. And I went in. So not only is it it is a rock and jazz bar. There are pictures of the Stones and Hendrix and then Coltrane, all around the place. But the decor, well, Philip, I'll leave that to you. I mean, how do we explain the decor of what clearly was a hostess bar?
So yeah, it was like someone's nightmare from the sort of mid 80s. And they just like vomited it all up in one space, and right down to the kind of the neon painting of New York that's hanging on one of the walls. And it looked like he just moved in. I mean, it was a hostess bar, and again, if you're familiar with Japanese culture, you'll know what a hostess bar is. If you're not, you could go look it up. But it's a fairly unsalubrious kind of place, and a lot of mirrors, a lot of gold, velvet, yeah. Which seems odd sometimes in the circumstances. You think you maybe want a more wiped down friendly surface, but basically really, really bad sort of 80s living room designed by somebody who got too much money too quickly, and he's obviously taken this over wholesale and inexplicably has decided not to do any kind of decoration whatsoever.
Just completely explicable. I would completely have left it like this.
Oh, would you?
100%. Oh, 100%.
You say that, but
no. Well, because think about it. There's so many jazz kisaten and jazz bars, but this one, this is one of one. This is unique. I mean, you've got not only the hostess bar. Look at that sofa. I mean, oh my God, the green, that olive green sofa. But then you can see the picture you have, the wide picture you have, which includes the great sound system. So you've got Coltrane. Then you got the Stones. Then with that double neck guitar, that's got to be Jimmy Page, right? That's Led Zeppelin. I can't quite see the word. Yes, it's Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, it's Led Zeppelin. Yeah.
So he's combined the two loves, his two musical loves. You got Miles Davis. You've got Art Pepper in there, and in this space that just very recently had been your prototypical hostess bar. I mean, it's definitely unique. Now, when we were in there was no one there. When I had visited a couple years earlier, There were quite a few people there, but because I sat at the counter, I was able to chat with him and his wife. And I don't remember what they had done previously, but he had said that the two of them had always planned to open their own place. They just never had got the right opportunity. And for whatever reason, this particular room had opened up and someone had told them about it. So even though it was a hostess bar, and even though the building that it's in is mostly hostess bars, they decided, what the hell, we'll just do it. And, so it's been going now for, 7 years? So hopefully, they've been able to keep it profitable.
And it was quite, it's the sort of, like trying to photograph it is difficult because it's a bit like when you keep your eyes closed for a long time and then you open them and there's all those little stars in your peripheral vision. That's what it's like. Like everywhere you look, there's like a light or a reflection or something sparkling. So it was quite difficult to photograph. And I also remember bearing in mind that we'd gone from the northernmost island of the country to the southernmost island, with the exception of Okinawa. And, we'd gone from a nice sort of mild summer breeze, to quote the Isley Brothers, right down to the kind of really sticky, sweaty atmosphere of a rainy season. And so we were in there with all that velvet. It was kind of damp and wet, and like we were sweaty, and it was just all very intense, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and for people who, again, are our listeners who know Japan or live in Japan, like, Kagoshima is not even a Kanto summer, which can be brutal. I mean, it's
wet,
really, really humid. And so we get off the plane and we're just like, oh man, not this again.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So just, wandering, we wandered around the sort of nighttime area. Kagoshima is not a huge city. It's a lovely city, and with one particular landmark, which we will be getting into shortly. But, just wandering around 20, 30 minutes, you really feel that humidity start to take a toll on you. So yeah, going into this sort of like lightly air-conditioned ex-hostess bar, it is a strange experience. It's funny, I didn't even remember that absolutely grotesque mural of New York. I mean, that's horrible.
Good, right? One really nice little detail, though, that he did keep, which I definitely applaud, is the telephone booth. So this is actually a door into a sort of a separate little private room where you could make phone calls back in the pre-mobile phone days. So really nice little detail there.
Is that where you would call your wife to say that your meeting ran late? Because I mean,
I'm up to my eyes here at the office. I'm going to be at least another 4 hours before I get back home. Yeah, exactly that probably. But
little did she know that you were going to listen to Art Pepper.
There you go. You see, so that was RIFF, and I mean, there were a few reasons for us, I suppose, picking Kagoshima. I was keen to see this friend of mine, David, and I suppose geographically as well, it made sense for us to start there, and then we kind of wind our way up through Kyushu Island. So we finished off the evening, as you say, after RIFF with a bit of dinner. We had a lovely, lovely ramen, which I think had sort of sliced beef in it, like a kind of almost like pastrami beef in it. But we got a singing performance during our meal.
We did indeed. It being the summer, which is the time of the year where Japanese local festivals happen, and local festivals in Japan include a lot of men in loincloths and vests wandering through the streets, beating on drums and singing.
Yeah.
While drinking copious amounts of sake from the morning onwards. And this being Kyushu, which is some would say the alcohol capital of Japan, the Kyushu boys take a particular pride in how much they can drink. And so we got a very close-up view of them as they popped into the ramen shop and gave us a cappella concert. Yeah,
well, luckily, James, talking of obsessive documentation, I've got a little video clip of that as well, which you can find on my Instagram, Philip Arneal, but also I'll pop it on the feed when we put this episode out, just so that you can fully enjoy that a cappella performance that we witnessed as we had our dinner. And after that then, James, we headed back to David's place, which I would say, if I was being generous, was compact. Would that be a fair description of his apartment?
In the interest of keeping our podcast family friendly, I'll refrain from giving both my review of his apartment and my opinion of you telling me, oh, no problem, we'll crash at my friend's, quote, apartment, unquote, where I expected a separate bedroom and bed. rather than what I later realized was a thin fold-out mattress, and that's being generous. Literally about 2 feet away from you and 6 feet away from Dave in his one-room, very small apartment.
I mean, I'd say it was a living example of the generation gap, wasn't it? Because, you know, had it been 20 years previously, we'd have probably thought, oh, this is quite luxurious. But having lived
wow,
there,
he's got a clean apartment. Yeah, great. But yeah, Dave being quite a bit younger, us being a little bit older and a bit tired.
Yeah.
And me being perhaps slightly finicky about certain things like that. I would only say slightly. Tiny bit. Yes, I was not pleased. But Dave was a great guy, absolutely lovely guy. I think we had a nightcap of a drink and then just crashed out, pretty quickly. So
it was like revisiting the old days. It's like it's like you could imagine again when you just come to Japan and everything was new and you were pleased to have your own apartment and you were earning some money of your own, and it was like, ooh, this is really. And David's still out there. He has changed his job. He's now married. He's also moved house as well. So if we do ever make it back there, and David, you happen to be listening to this podcast, thank you for letting us stay. Apologies for my friend. Next time I come back to your bigger, more luxurious house, I'll make sure I'm on my own.
Hey, I gave Dave my Gold Bond powder, so as a thank you. So I think that was a fair trade.
Fair point. Okay. Day 3, and after our rather interesting night's accommodation, we were still in Kagoshima, of course. And just to refute the idea that we're obsessed with only jazz places and that kind of nerdy side of Japanese culture, we also decided we'd do a little bit of tourist fare by heading over to a very, very famous volcano just off the coast of Kagoshima. And actually, it's amazing because from the apartment that we stayed, despite the restrictions when it came to sleeping arrangements, we could actually from the balcony see the volcano, and it's not uncommon for it to be regularly erupting, and you can actually see that smoke. And David mentioned even the fact that he quite often has to take his washing in and give it a good shake because there's so much dust and ash in the air that despite washing it, it's often covered in that very, very quickly afterwards. So James, what about this visit? That was your first time as well, wasn't it?
Yes, Sakurajima. It's amazing because you're not joking. You can pretty much see it from anywhere in the city. It's a massive, massive mountain just across the water, a really short ferry ride. And it is very active. I had visited Kagoshima a couple years before we went, and I remember the hotel I was staying in had one of the outdoor, balcony onsens, hot springs bath overlooking the volcano, and it was quite a sight to be there so relaxed, and then you're starting to see the smoke come out of it and think, wait a second, that's not relaxing at all. What do I know from volcanoes? I don't want to be around that. But yes, it's definitely still active, but you can go over and visit. So, we went over, like you said, we took the ferry, and when you land, people live on the island. They actually do live there. There's shops, there's quite a good road system and bus system. And we were waiting for the bus. And obviously, like we talked about, it was already burning hot at about 9:30 in the morning. And, going out there right under the sun, we were already beginning to feel it. And as you ride up and wander around, you start seeing these things that, at first don't make a lot of sense. But then you remember you're on an active volcano. You remember the bus stops? And right next to the bus stops were either little sheds where you could sort of like hide underneath in case there was an eruption. And these were all over the island. Even a lot of the graves, because people have been living here for hundreds and hundreds of years, a lot of the graves had little umbrella type things on them. So people who would come to tend to their ancestors' graves could wipe off the ash. I'd never quite seen anything like that.
Yeah, it's funny because, of course, Sakurajima translates as Cherry Blossom Island, but and it is beautiful, but there is a certain apocalyptic feel about the whole place, and obviously we'd been directed with a bit of local knowledge up to a particular school, so we jumped on that bus, which is the only bus service on the island. Obviously it's one of those one every 40 minutes or one every hour type services. I think actually we got on a bus and then we had to go to a sort of a terminus and change to another bus, didn't we, that took us further up the mountain.
Terminus is, yes, being very generous,
that's probably
but yes.
Slight exaggeration. Yes, a
Right.
shed with some men smoking is probably a closer description.
Yes.
But yeah, so we jumped on that bus and went up to this junior high school where actually my friend David that I mentioned had taught previously, and he'd obviously had to take the ferry over to the island and go up to that school to deliver lessons. But what an amazing place that was.
Oh, unbelievable. And then, right near it, do you remember we just walked down a tiny bit because you can only go you can't even go, I would say about a third up the mountain, and then it's closed off because there's three separate peaks to it, and only authorized people can get up there, people who are doing work on the volcano. But yes, there is that school there, and then we walked down a little further, and there was this really amazing abandoned Shinto shrine that felt as if because there's nobody around. I mean, this is like an early Saturday morning, right? And you walk through the Torii gate into the grounds of the shrine. And I remember just thinking that it felt like we had gone back like 300 or 400 years and found this, abandoned site. It was unbelievable.
It's pretty amazing. And of course, we walked through that Torii gate to get to what's now the shrine, but in actual fact the original Torii gate, which I suppose would have been probably somewhere in the region of 4 to 5 meters high, is actually buried now. So the sort of remaining 1 meter or so pops out of the ground as you walk up towards the other shrine. It's on your left, but obviously it's been buried over the decades and centuries from all the falling ash. And what's interesting about that school is it's a very small number of kids who now attend it, but actually one of the jobs that they're responsible for is maintaining that shrine. And so as part of their daily duties, and if you're familiar with Japanese schools, you'll know it's an obligation for kids to clean their own school in different ways, and this is one of the tasks that the kids in this particular school are charged with. And I have some photos of that I'll pop up on the social media channel as well. But I mean, it's probably, again, slight exaggeration. I mean, it is a shrine, but it's very makeshift and very sort of down home and organic sort of feel to the whole thing. There's nothing grand or anything about it, and you can understand why, of course, because they're living on that island under the constant threat of a really serious eruption.
There are more people living there than you'd think. I mean,
absolutely,
I believe it's about 4,000 currently, 4,000 people, which is certainly bigger than some of the villages that you can pass through on the main islands. And again, Sakurajima is super, super close to Kagoshima, the city of which is 650,000 people. I think it's only about a couple miles, about 4 or 5 kilometers across the water. So that entire city, metro area is just living. Everyone in Japan lives with the risk of earthquakes, but the people in Kagoshima are living on a double-edged sword there with the threat of earthquakes and this massive, very active volcano, which is, I believe it is about 1,500 or 1,600 meters high. So it's pretty high and very powerful, and it erupts pretty regularly. I think the last one was just about 3 or 4 months ago, and it covered the city of Kagoshima in about a half centimeter of ash, which doesn't sound like a lot until you look at it and realize that that's from a volcano. Pretty terrifying stuff.
Yeah, a fascinating place, though, and I'm glad we went. The other thing, of course, that I remember is those incredible exposed tree roots, the huge trees with the roots growing over the ground. It put me in mind of the trees I'd seen in Okinawa and places like that as well. Very sort of almost like a Southeast Asian feel to it. Really, really interesting place.
Yeah, like we said about Hokkaido, when you really feel that you're entering the northern lands, down in Kyushu and certainly down in Kagoshima at the tip, that's sort of the gateway to, a more tropical type of place like Okinawa, like Taiwan. Yeah. The food is different. The weather is obviously different. And it's, a very unique part of Japan, which I would recommend. I think Kyushu is fantastic, personally. I think people really kind of miss out on it when they come here. So I usually tell visitors to spend a couple days down there if they can.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the photos as well. Again, I'll post these on our feed. But obviously, the playground of the school is completely covered in ash. You can really see it. It's that kind of gravelly school playground that is so familiar in schools in Japan. But particularly, this one is covered with ash. And also, as you mentioned, right across the road, there is the shelter. It's number 8 specifically. And what's interesting about it is it's in Chinese, Japanese, English, and Korean as well. And the English translation is, "This shelter is to protect you from volcanic ash and falling rocks in the case that Sakurajima should erupt." So again, it just gives you that sense of what people live with, and also, I suppose, what's become normal and every day when you're used to being in that kind of area where it's a constant threat. It's just something that you kind of take as a given and
yeah, I think
things,
I'd be more on the please be aware you may die while visiting here. I think that's probably the warning I would want. But no, it's a magical place. I mean, the ferry ride over is just you get closer and closer, and it rises way up into the sky, and you see it puffing like a chimney. It's really something.
Excuse me. Well, it's funny you mentioned the ferry ride because, of course, that was also the scene on our return of that stunning portrait that I took of you on my phone, looking wistfully off into the ocean.
Yes, that is right. It almost looks professionally tousled hair looking off into the distance. That is a great photo of me. But even better, and I hope you have a copy because long story, but I've lost mine. Do you remember when we were waiting for the bus, you were walking off, taking some pictures and looking around, and I started talking to a very, very old lady who had come over on the boat with us, and she was going up to the cemetery by herself to tend to the grave of, I believe it was of her parents. And she had grown up on the island. She was really hard to understand. She had a pretty thick local accent. Yeah. So, I was struggling to keep up, but I just got the most of it that she lived in the city, but would come over once a month and tend to the grave, which is pretty dedicated because most Japanese people have sort of lost that custom. They'll go maybe once a year, maybe not at all. But she would go once a month to both of her parents' graves, and you took a great picture of me and her sitting there at the bus station, which I just treasure that one.
I must look that one out, actually. Yeah, I'm just... for anyone who is in Japan interested in making that trip, just to make it a little easier for you, the place is actually called Kurokami, which I suppose translates directly as Black God. And what's amazing as well is that on the sign that points towards the shrine, just below that, the English translation is Lava Hell of Kurokami. So, if that doesn't attract you, nothing will. So anyway, we jumped on that ferry, James, because we had a car reservation, of course, around lunchtime. I've got this picture of you tagged there at 12:52. So we were heading back just around lunchtime to pick up a car, which we kept for the next few days because this part of our journey we did by road rather than the fantastic public transport in Japan. And after picking up that car in Kagoshima, we fell almost into a little bit of a sort of a time slip as I felt, because when you look at on the map again, to go from Kagoshima to Kumamoto, which was our final destination that day, it's only 2.5 hours. But we had decided to try and take in a place called Paragon. And again, just looking on the map, you think, well, it's just a little side trip. But somehow it just seemed that however far we drove, we never seemed to get any closer. And every time I looked up Google Maps, I was like, it must be wrong because it can't still be that far away. It's like when you go to a country and you're checking on the currency exchange and you're like, it can't be that much. It simply can't cost that much. Like when you buy a pizza or a coffee in Norway, you're like, it can't possibly cost that much.
Well, I think a lot of it is I mean, from my point of view, I've never driven in Japan. Ever in all my years here. Obviously, it's on the wrong side of the road for me, and I don't like driving anyway. But one thing I noticed is that, yes, with the distance, and this trip really, because we saw it again and again, you can't just judge by the map because roads are not like they are, for example, in the States. Very wide, very straight, drive very fast. Japan is narrow, it's tight, it's very mountainous. So what looks fairly close by distance is you're very rarely getting above 50 to 60 kilometers. And even when you do, you've got to stop quite often because these are local roads. So it took us a lot longer. And then I remember Paragon, the first place we went to, is not like We say this all the time, Philip, and I know our listeners are probably like, how can every place be unique and individual? But it's true. And this is another example. Paragon is not like any other place we've been to. I think if you're with us on day 3, you know the drill by now. You're at TokyoJazzJoints.com in the regions section and look under P for Paragon. And right away, the first picture, look at that highway sign. I mean, that's a highway sign. It's written in Japanese, but that's a highway sign that you see very much in the U.S. telling you to go to this shop or that diner. And I've never seen one that said jazz on it before. And so, right away I was excited. Once I saw the sign, I thought, my God, that's got to be a special place. And Paragon was absolutely special. Unfortunately, when we walked in, and maybe this was, our mistake because of the timing, it was completely packed with Sunday afternoon tea and cake customers.
Yeah, I mean, even from the outside, to me, it just had that feel. I mean, it opened in 76, so it has that feel of a place. And it was just this little, almost like cul-de-sac area, and it's covered with ivy and foliage. And then you go inside and it's just so beautifully maintained. It's all wooden. It's like, I swear that it's unchanged since 76. So you get this kind of real feel of the era. And then obviously the centerpiece is this enormous Paragon sound system that gives the place its name. And I think also what was really interesting for me about it was that, like, they had this unbelievable menu. I mean, there were families in there and they were having these kind of like old school ice cream sundaes and things that you just like, you can't get, like you just don't get anymore. It was like stepping back in time.
How do you pronounce the frappe, F-R-A-P-P?
Frappe, yeah. Well, that's probably the modern version of it. Yeah.
But I mean, they were huge. Yeah. In those really old, like kind of tall, thick glass, sort of dishes that you would make an ice cream float in. It was so retro. And yet, at the same time, and I'm really glad you because it was very hard to take pictures because it was so crowded.
Really hard, yeah.
So, you could only get a couple angles, but you got a feel of their record collection because check out the amount of John Coltrane albums that they have there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that photograph, I mean, there's lots of these sort of photos in the project, of course, but as has been documented in many other episodes, I'm a huge Coltrane fan. I mean, who isn't? But I think just, all these single records together and some of the gatefolds, and then suddenly this Coltrane in Japan box set really stood out to me visually. But it was hard to take photos for sure. I mean, the sound system in itself, I think I just took that by standing up at our table. You were facing towards the room and I was facing towards the system, and I literally had to just stand up in my seat and then try and get what I could.
And I ducked, and I mean, and I remember we did pass our card, or one of our business cards, to them on the way out and kind of explain that we were touring around. And I believe it may have been the wife, the mother of the family, who talked to me and said, "Oh, it's a shame that you came at this time on a weekend because it's very crowded. We're kind of busy." She did realize what we wanted, and I think it would have been okay to take a lot more pictures, but it was really peak time, and the whole staff were running around. I think it was the couple and a daughter and maybe a part timer, and just running around serving coffee, tea, and desserts. Yeah. So it was just not the right right vibe at the time for us to do an interview and spend an hour and a half crawling around the place, which is a shame. But looking back on it, I think it's not quite as far as maybe we imagined. If you can make a return trip, maybe we can swing it again. This time we'll be prepared.
Yeah, I think we were just expecting it to be closer, and then you're like, why is it so far? And I think it's particularly the next leg of the journey that really felt far. So, once you go outside Japan, I mean, there are fantastic highways. I've driven all over Japan, but, there's maybe not the variety or the multitude of them that you get in the more built up areas like around Tokyo and that whole sort of seaboard. So, you might be on major roads, but still you're stopping at lights and all those kind of things. And it just felt so far. But I mean, the other thing about, not being able to take so many pictures as well, I think, and this is something that I've stressed, when we talk about the project as well, like we're not just collecting these places, we do within reason, obviously, because we are sometimes on a schedule, and obviously we're definitely on a budget because, as I've said, we've never had any funding for this project, but we do want to enjoy the places as well. I mean, I don't want to fall into this trap that of the tourist that kind of goes to a place and experiences it through the camera, and then when you get home, you sort of think, I didn't really see the place myself, and the only thing that you have is those photographs. So it was nice. I had a cracking bit of cake, if I remember correctly, and a nice coffee.
Well, I think that's part of it, though, is that because and there are a few exceptions, one in particular which we will get to later today, but the nature of where we're going, of the places that we're profiling, are that you come in and sit down and have a drink. So, it's not a place that you can just run by and see a site and take your snap. So it was just, we did, the photos here were probably 5-6 minutes total that you were able to get just a few, and then we sat for about half an hour having our coffee and just enjoying the vibe. And it was a lovely place, very unexpected. Like I said, very much reminded me of like an American place that you would find all over the States, except for this great jazz collection.
Well, that one particular, which I think is one of the family that run the place, sort of blurred out slightly as she's walking across to clean a table. But, you can see that classic sort of eclectic mix of things that you get in these places, particularly family run ones. So, you have the standard frame pictures of jazz musicians. Then you've got sort of a coffee ad. You've got posters of more current events. You've got a menu. Then you've got this more sort of older Japanese style picture. And then over on the left, of course, you've got these sometimes odd kind of like classical type statues or images that we get, and I think that's either a barometer or a thermometer, but it's just really interesting, like the kind of mixture of stuff. And this place was one of those really eclectic places, a lot of frilly edges here and there, and polished glass and all this kind of stuff. And of course they had that huge bar area, which unfortunately I wasn't able to photograph, but do you remember the owner just like mixing up these like drinks and all at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon?
Because there was a separate, it was kind of divided into two big rooms, and the other room had a lot more smaller individual tables. There were definitely a couple people having some afternoon drinks in there, I noticed. And excuse me, and they even have, like, to go back to that picture of what we believe is one of the daughters, not just the photos, but the posters on the right. I mean, that's a poster for the Tamisil group, Honda Tamaya's group, who we ran into another part of our journey up in Sendai. So they're kind of keeping up to date with modern contemporary groups, but also keeping this vibe of, it's funny, it opened in 1976, but it feels more like something in the 50s to me, it has that feel, definitely. And I think the American thing really chimed with me, it is that sort of, it's really hard to put into words, I think, which is why I'm a photographer, but like, there was something just different about it, that it just felt like stepping across the threshold. You were, for sure, going into some sort of different era. And I think it will always retain that slight air of mystery. It's the only place, unfortunately, for the Instagram story that I put together with all the places in consecutive order that I forgot to take a video, which shows you that we were probably slightly stressed and slightly under pressure for time. And so, we're also a bit tired already. We just climbed up a volcano in 38 degrees centigrade. So, but yeah, we were rushed, and I remember we got back in the car, and do you remember what happened next? So we're already running way late, and yet again miscalculated time. Yep. So when we thought we were going to arrive at the next place in plenty of time, and this is now a Sunday, so opening hours are shorter.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Pretty quickly realized that a place we want to go called Cafe Jarrett, as in Keith Jarrett, in Kumamoto City, that we're not going to make.
This podcast was produced and created by Philip Arneal and James Catchpole of the Tokyo Jazz Joints Project. Thanks to Brian of Grooves Ahead for audio assistance, and also to Louie Lastic for our theme music.